All right, welcome back. Another episode of the Black News Podcast. Really the same episode. I'm just doing them in different segments. I'm about to get into another news story for my current events segment for today. I'm doing it solo dolo if you haven't noticed. The next one I'm going to get into, because I'm going to spare the intros because I got to go pretty soon, is I wanted to talk about a recent episode of Dr. Phil. And on Dr. Phil, they were talking about the subject of cultural appropriation, which is something that I've actually been thinking about for years. And I have a lot to say on it, but I want to do it in the context of that episode. I generally don't think that talk shows of the form that Dr. Phil put on are the best format for discussing things that are really complicated and nuanced. I think the better formats would be those that you typically find on a college campus, seminars, colloquia, um, little college talks and things like that with a Q&A session, symposia, things like that. Those are usually better, or long form podcasts that try to delve into those things. I think that those are a lot better from getting at the nuance, although they're not really good at keeping the very, very short attention spans of a general audience, though. So it takes work to kind of keep your focus for those periods of time. So it's one of the reasons why I've taken to podcasts. I wouldn't do like a TV show. I don't think that that'd be the best way to cover things. But whatever the pitfalls of that, the show did try to cover a topic that I think is worthy of discussion, and so I want to try to bring that into the fold. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show kind of like the intro, which is really, really short, and probably put certain things in post as I talk about them, so I can break up the monotony of me just talking to the camera too much. I don't like doing this solo dolo. I think what's more interesting is a back and forth between me and somebody else who genuinely disagree. But what I'm going to try to do is be somewhat of a schizo and play devil's advocate and argue on both sides to try to make sure that on some level I'm covering all sides and not being that biased. It's a great check on my bias, and it's also a great way to make sure that I'm understanding all sides of an issue. So that's what I'm going to try to do today. So, without further ado, I'm going to show the kind of intro so that you kind of know what we're talking about and know which episode I'm referring to. I highly recommend you watch the full 14-minute episode because it was pretty interesting, and there was some back and forth there that I think could be useful to discuss. So, without further ado, here we go.
Today on an all-new Dr. Phil, cultural appropriation.
I got called all sorts of names for wearing the dress.
You actually got death threats. You were called out for appropriating an anime character.
I was told that I was black and not Japanese.
I think imitation is a form of flattery.
If somebody wears their hair like you're wearing it, you put that on the same level as racism.
Same level as white supremacy.
All right, so it's about to get started there. So I just wanted you guys to get a little Costco sample, a little taste of what that episode was about. Again, I highly recommend that you watch it. I'm going to talk about it assuming that you've seen it. And I've seen various different clips of it, and I've watched it all the way through like one time about maybe a week ago now. So a lot of it's going to be vague. I tried to watch some of it just right now, but I ended up doing other things at the same time, defeated the purpose. But it's really the subject matter of cultural appropriation. And I'm actually going to play some clips live, but I'm probably going to play a lot more clips in post. So notably, there is the kind of the college professor that they had there. I forget what college that he was from. And the way that like Fox News covered this, and it didn't get a lot of coverage in the news in general, but Fox News had like this whole headline, which I'm going to show you, and it emphasized something that he said. And I don't know that it was the fairest way to actually like delve into what was being discussed. I don't like the kind of decontextualized ways with which the Fox News covered it, but I want to show you this Fox News article right here and give a little critique of it to a certain extent. So here it is. So here's the Fox News article, and it starts off. So the headline is Dr. Phil guest claims white supremacy is embedded in everything in segment on cultural appropriation. Now he did literally say those words. I think he was attempting to make a deeper point, which I'm going to try to steel man at some point during this episode or during this segment. So Phil McGraw, better known as Dr. Phil, lamented the rise of cancel culture in society. So Fox News is just emphasizing, the stupid thing that the woke college professor said, and I just think that this angle is not really serving of the discourse at all. And I don't like it when anybody does it. I don't like when Fox News does it. I don't like it when CNN does it. It's clearly partisan. It's clearly motivated to make the other side look bad with blatant disregard for what was actually trying to be said. You can disagree with what he was actually trying to convey, but at least like represent it with fidelity. So it reads, I'm not going to read this whole thing. It reads, a university professor told Dr. Phil, didn't even give his name. A university professor told Dr. Phil's audience Friday that cultural appropriation is about how white supremacy is embedded in everything. By the way, this was a black dude with gray dreadlocks. You'll see it in the episode later. Here they do say his name. Arizona State University professor Dr. Neil A. Lester also suggested that people who appropriate dreadlocks are on the same level as white supremacy, end quote, while appearing on Friday's episode of Dr. Phil to debate whether it is okay for people to borrow from other cultures. Lester added, quote, this is about humanity or the lack of humanity. When we're putting on someone else's culture, that is somebody else's identity. So when you're talking about being worried about stuff, I'm talking about this in the context of power and history. All right, later in the show, after a large portion of the audience raised their hands to indicate they thought concern about cultural appropriation was overblown, the professor suggested that white supremacy, quote unquote, can be found in surprising places. Last paragraph I'm going to read. When we talk about systemic racism, which many of us, this is a quote, when we talk about systemic racism, which many of us started talking about after George Floyd's murder, we started seeing the ways in which white supremacy is embedded in everything, end quote, he said. Oh, another quote. And cultural appropriation is about that. It's not only about that, but it's about that, end quote. So I'm going to try to find that part where he says that, and so you can hear it kind of in its more full context. Again, I definitely recommend that you watch the full thing. And then there's going to be people that move on to push back. I'm going to try to show some of that. One member of the audience pushed back and suggested that what clothes or hairstyles people of different races are culturally allowed to wear is a petty problem. And so I think that actually is a great way to summarize kind of where I'm coming at this, because I actually do see validity to both sides on this issue. I do think that a lot of times the particular examples of cultural appropriation that are used and that people are complaining about, they are petty. They amount to some person who's not a member of the group or the original culture that originated something, nonetheless partaking in the cultural practice or wearing the cultural, donning the cultural, whatever it is, article of clothing or whatever, or participating in the music style or something in a way that's actually inherently celebratory, and it's not really that problematic whatsoever, but like that gets cast aside or people draw a blind eye to that because fundamentally the person who's not a member of the group is doing the thing that belongs to the other group, and that's kind of like that's where it becomes very petulant. It's like, but like, first of all, in what sense does it belong to the group such that no one else can partake in it? And secondly, even if we agree that it belongs to that group, at least in its origins, like why wouldn't you want them to partake in it, insofar as for them doing so is an acknowledgement of how awesome that thing is? So people do get petty like that. However, there are some important distinctions that we can draw to steelman this, because I think that what people who are more careful are complaining about are not just people observing certain cultural things that didn't originate from their culture, but doing it in a way that where they profit and or take credit for it, which is actually something that this professor explicitly said, which this article downplays and or doesn't even mention, and I don't like that. So one of my critiques about the way that this is being covered by Fox News, which I think is irresponsible, is it's not presenting what he was trying to convey in the most accurate or best light at all. And I decry that when CNN does that shit, or MSNBC, or any of the left-leaning sources. I decry it just as much when the right-leaning sources do it too. And Fox News does this just about as often as CNN and MSNBC does, TBH. But I'm going to stop sharing this now. And I want to see, I'm going to try to see if I can play some more of that Dr. Phil.
I want you to take a look at these pictures for me. Anything jump out at you?
Yes. They're in costumes.
Right. They're in costumes. These are all celebrities who have been called out, criticized, and condemned for cultural appropriation. Has anyone here ever called someone out for cultural appropriation? You too? You have? You have? Yep. Has anybody here ever thought twice about wearing something or doing something, even cooking something, out of fear of being accused of appropriation. You have?
Yes.
Yeah, what was it?
That's the college professor I was talking about, the black guy.
And she wanted me to get braids that were just like hers.
Why her but not you?
She's half black and half white,
Okay.
and so I just think that
That awkward cough.
some things should stick with those cultures.
Well, no matter whether you believe it's hard.
All right, let me stop this. So I actually want to go back to something. I missed it because I was trying to fiddle with the background stuff. So here. So all of the examples of cultural appropriation that are on display, they have something in common. Can you tell what they have in common? They're mostly white people. And I don't think that's an accident. I think that when a lot of people talk about cultural appropriation, they typically have in mind white people partaking in cultures that are not originated by, Caucasians or Europeans. And also white people are kind of the poster child for this because they're generally regarded, and I think reasonably so, as the dominant group, particularly in contexts like the United States. White people are the dominant group. They're the majority. They've been the majority historically. They've been the ones who colonized and pilfered and took over and all that kind of stuff. In all kinds of diabolical ways. And that's not a plaything. I'm not downplaying it. I'm stating it simply because I want to move on to make a greater point. So that's why I think white people are the poster child for this kind of thing, or at least partially why. But it's gotten to the point of a kind of like overly simplistic stereotype where even the people who are interested in cultural appropriation are turning a blind eye to examples of this kind of thing being perpetrated by non-white people. and some people even go so far as to pretend as if it's impossible for non-white people to be guilty of some form of cultural appropriation, that is taking credit for cultural elements that are not originated by them or their people, so to speak. And this is one of the things that fascinates me about this discourse is those who complain the hardest are the most inconsistent most of the time. Now, some are more careful than others. And I think this college professor is more careful because at some point he's going to say that anybody can culturally appropriate, not just white people. I think that was a great move. That was smart. It demonstrates that he's more careful in his thought about this, and he cares about the consistency and the coherence of this. Because anybody who takes the view that only white people can do this, like, they're gonna lose eventually, because that position is untenable. It's gonna fall under the weight of its own, like, self-contradiction. There's so many examples that I have prepared to show to y'all of black people in particular, but not just black people, just non-white people in general, who are in some sense borrowing, appropriating, taking, stealing, whatever you want to call it, cultural elements that come from a culture that does not, that comes from either a group of people who originated the culture that they're not a part of, as far as being like a part of that ethnic group or a part of that culture, but they are in close proximity to nonetheless. I can just name them right quick. We got the Go Loco video by YG. This motherfucker's in full red mariachi garb. That nigga's not Mexican. And he not even half Mexican. He's not even part Mexican. There's like no Mexican in this nigga at all, right? But he's donning the full mariachi gear. And so if a white person did that, I'm sure that they would draw in the ire in a way that a lot of the same people did not turn towards YG. Now, to be fair, some people found it controversial, and actually some people of Mexican descent found it controversial, to be fair. But those are the kinds of people who are a little bit more radical, though. But not the same amount of people found the YG's donning of mariachi garb in that video as offensive as they probably would have found it if, I don't know, fucking Weird Al Yankovic or somebody white did that shit. I think Weird Al Yankovic is probably Jewish or some shit, but like if a white person had did that shit, if Lil Dicky had did that shit, I wonder how that would have affected him. Or somebody else. He's Jewish too, actually. If Eminem had did that shit in 2022, although Eminem did some problematic shit in the past, particularly with the way he used to depict gay people. But if Eminem had did that shit in 2022, I wonder if he would have drew the ire of the woke in a way that YG didn't really. And there's, I mean, you got AMBJ with that Uno song. You got and that borrows from Musically, it borrows from kind of Mexican mariachi culture, and he doesn't even really speak Spanish. It's obvious he doesn't speak Spanish. I'm an intermediate Spanish speaker. I speak Spanish better than that nigga. And there's some stereotyping in the video. I'll show you guys some of that in a second. But these are the ones that come to mind. And then the last one is that Chun-Li music video by Nicki Minaj, and the borrowing of like Asian culture, cultural elements and Asian garb, and actually Black people borrowing from Asian cultures in general, from the Yin Yang Twins to the Wu-Tang Clan. But like nobody talks about that, or at least they don't say it with their chests as much as Kim Kardashian braiding her hair, or Madonna wearing some garb associated with, I don't know, Native Americans in some way, or is that Taylor Swift with the feather headdress and shit? Justin Bieber trying to be a wigger or some shit. Like I don't Justin Bieber swear he Black though. He's JB now. Or whatever. You know, Bruno Mars is an interesting phenomenon too, because Bruno Mars' music is quintessentially Black, although he's not a Black person. His style, his dance moves, and there have been some people who are left of center and woke types who have complained about it, but like he's not the poster child. Like Bruno Mars, I don't think is on this thing. I don't know who that dude is next to Kim Kardashian though, but I'm pretty sure that's not Bruno Mars. I assume he's a white person because that seems to fit the pattern. But he looks like he got a tan though, so I don't know. He might be mixed with something. But yeah, I just wanted to start there because like one of the things that like kind of makes me like roll my eyes when this gets discussed is that the people are hyper focused on white people doing this, and I don't think that although I do acknowledge the bit that I don't think is trivial about how white people are the dominant group, and that is relevant in the most robust Steelman version of this, but exclusively focusing in on it, I don't think it's justified at all, because I think it's clear that anybody can culturally appropriate. And the power dynamics thing is going to be relevant, but a lot of the examples that people complain about have a blatant disregard to power dynamics. Like, and then also the power dynamics aren't even clear if it's cultural appropriation between two groups that are historically marginalized. So if you have a Black person taking elements from a Hispanic or a Mexican person, let's say, then what are the power dynamics exactly? And how do we evaluate that if we're going to take into account power dynamics? The rules about this shit are not clear. And even the college professors and the academic types don't seem to have all the answers either, which makes this discussion, I think, partly what makes it fascinating and interesting, but also partly what makes it kind of a fool's errand, because like you need the answers to those questions in order to, in some sense, like culturally adjudicate who's right and who's wrong in any particular instance, or alleged instance of cultural appropriation. So that's one of the reasons why I'm kind of annoyed by this discussion, but I like having it because there's parts of it that are interesting, but I'm annoyed by the facet of it where people come into there kind of like accusing people of having committed the crime of cultural appropriation, and they want all these consequences of like social ostracization and cancel culture, and they want motherfuckers to lose their jobs and shit over it. And it's like, bro, there's so many questions that are unanswered here that you would need to answer before you even start taking steps towards punishing people for what may just be an imagined crime that you made up because of your political disposition or your ideological persuasion. But anyway, let me continue.
Costumes.
Right? They're in costumes. These are all celebrities who have been called out, criticized, and condemned for cultural appropriation. Has anyone here ever called someone out for cultural appropriation?
All right, I'm gonna try to skip ahead.
You too? You have?
Same values.
What do you think about appropriation? Do you think this is
the part I want y'all to see?
A real thing, something that people need to be cognizant of, and if so, why?
Absolutely. Well, because if we in fact are trying to look at the humanity of other people, and we are trying to live in a place where we are trying to be respectful and mindful of folks, then we need to be aware of things that are important to other cultures that don't necessarily look like us or share the same values. So it is a thing, and people need to be aware of.
Can anybody appropriate?
Anybody can appropriate, yes.
Not just white.
This is where I think he was careful to his credit.
Absolutely. Appropriation is intersectional. So old
Although that
people can
part,
appropriate youth culture can appropriate old folks. People who are not incarcerated can impersonate, prisoners or those who are incarcerated. Men appropriate women's attire for the sake of funny.
I got a couple things to say about that last part he just said. So there's a couple of things I want to break down. So the first thing, I like that he was careful enough to admit that anybody can culturally appropriate. It's not just white people. I think that people who think that's just an untenable position. And I want to smoke. Anybody in the comments, comment if you disagree. But the next thing that he said that I think is interesting is he kept using the phrase. What was the phrase that he used? I just forgot that fast. He kept using impersonate, I think was the phrase that he used. Because it had kind of like tacit, like pejorative connotation of like you're pretending, you're faking, which is related to the last thing that he said that I want to talk about. You're not of that culture, but you're pretending as if you are. You're in costume, something that he said earlier. So if you're not Native American, but you're dressing like a Native American, you're in some sense a poser, right? You're pretending, you're faking. If you're an old person, but you're trying to dress like the young people, you're faking, you're pretending, you're impersonating. Men, what's an interesting example is that he used men do this for the sake of funny. Now, I think what he has in mind is somebody like Martin Lawrence in Big Mama's House, wearing that fat bodysuit, or maybe Eddie Murphy in The Nutty Professor, or maybe Tyler Perry in all of those Tyler Perry movies where he depicts Medea. I think that he has something like that in mind. And those are not instances where people are trying to like they're genuinely trying to pass as black women. They're doing that for the sake of acting. They're thespians, and they're trying to convey things in the context of a movie or whatever and play a character. Now that is distinct from trans people, apparently. But what's interesting is he talks so loosely. I wonder what distinctions he would make between contexts where people are, they're clearly acting or whatever, and they're doing it for maybe for comedic purposes or something like that, and then people who are biologically male who are presenting as female in order to assume their identity. Now, one clear distinction is that they're not acting in a certain sense. They're not doing it for a movie role. They're not playing a character in a movie, right? But what's a little bit fuzzy is, are they acting in some sense? Are they pretending in some sense? Is there no pretense there? If you're biologically male, but you are presenting and behaving as if you are female, as if you are a woman. Maybe you genuinely believe this to be the case, but then there's still a question of the fact of the matter. And if it turns out that you believe yourself to be something that you in fact aren't, then are you guilty of some kind of pretense? That's an interesting question to me. It's a question that you're not allowed to ask, because to ask that is to be transphobic. And I think a core contention of those who are pro-trans is that they are like trans women are women is the chant, is the mantra, right? It's like, who are you trying to convince if you that needs to be your mantra? But like everybody who believes that a trans woman is not really a woman but is like pretending to be a woman is mistaken according to this view. They're mistaken in a fundamental way, because the criteria for being a woman apparently doesn't hinge on biology according to this view. That would be biological determinism, which is inherently transphobic. It hinges on your inner sense of self or some shit. It's not really clear what it hinges on because they're not very specific, but it has something to do with how you feel inside. Otherwise, what are we to make of the importance of gender dysphoria in the construction of a trans identity, or the experience of a trans or non-binary person, right? I take for granted that they genuinely feel this way. I take for granted that they genuinely feel the dysphoria as such as it has been described and elaborated on in various different psychological journals and even in the DSM-5. But like, there's still a question of the fact of the matter. Just because a person genuinely feels that they are a thing doesn't make them that thing, right? Ben Shapiro recently used these examples. I thought they were perfectly good examples. I can use examples from other people if you don't like Ben, but I think the examples speak for themselves. An anorexic person, at least in some cases, is a person who is underweight or is really, really slim or skinny, who genuinely believes that they are overweight. They genuinely believe that with every fiber of their being, all the way down to their bones. It's not something that they're pretending, right? But they're in fact not overweight, though. And just because they genuinely believe that they are doesn't mean that it's true. And so I think that that's an interesting thing to consider when it comes to this kind of trans debate, because that doesn't seem to be something that people left of center have considered very seriously at all. They seem to just have presumed that what it means to be a man or a woman is merely a consequence of the ways in which our society is constructed and has nothing at all to do with biological realities. And on what basis is that claim made? I would love to talk to somebody who's supposedly an expert on these kinds of things, but every time I try to ask that question, I get called names. And I'm genuinely asking that question. I'm just as genuine as the person who genuinely is biologically male and genuinely believes themselves to be a woman. I'm no less genuine than them. I genuinely want to know, but I guess, I don't know. It's hard to get people to actually buckle down and actually defend these views, because I guess ultimately they're motivated by some kind of compassion, and they think that they're protecting people, and so they have to win even if what they think it doesn't make sense or is wrong. So I just wanted to comment on that real quick, because what he said, I don't think he meant to go down that road, but I think he had in mind more, again, then you have the Joanna Man example, which is kind of an interesting example. It's kind of between them, but I think he had more the Big Mama's House, the Tyler Perry as Medea type thing, that those for comedic effect, people wearing bodysuits, Miss Doubtfire examples, as opposed to trans and non-binary people. But it's an interesting question. To what extent are trans people appropriating things from other genders or from the opposite sex? That's an interesting question to me. And that question is obfuscated if you think that there are 300 genders or something like that. I don't think that doesn't make sense to me. But it's an interesting, fascinating question. To what extent is a trans person guilty of appropriation in precisely the sense that he means to talk about it? And how transphobic is it to even consider, according to the woke? How transphobic is it even to entertain the question? Are we even allowed to entertain the question? Are we guilty of wrong speak if we entertain the question? Do we harbor some kind of ill will towards trans people by entertaining and trying to make sense of these things? Huh? To what extent are you not allowed to think certain things or even consider certain things, lest you be guilty of something like transphobia in your heart of hearts or some shit? Interesting.
And mocking. So absolutely anybody can do it, and everybody on some level may have flirted with it.
Okay, but a lot of the time that people that I've seen are called out for this, it's not that they were making fun or mocking in some way. It was just that they had adopted a fashion or a style or whatever.
I would say that's a performance. So if somebody's culture and somebody's identity becomes a performance, then it's reductive.
I wonder if that applies. I can't get off this. I wonder if that he would apply that to trans people. Is that a performance? Because to say it is a performance is to come really, really close to what I think the woke people would consider transphobic, because it implies that it's not real or not genuine in some sense, and that trans people are illegitimate. And so you would be likely to be accused of denying the existence of trans people, whatever the fuck that means. Even though that has nothing to do or no bearing whatsoever on the ontological status of these people. But I wonder if he would apply that to trans people. I actually am just curious about this now, even though it's a little bit off topic. Would that, because otherwise it would be inconsistent, or at least it's not clear why you wouldn't apply that to trans people, insofar as if it's possible for, I guess, okay, let me see if I can steel man the other side a little bit. I want to take into account some things that they would say. So you have a cis het male like Tyler Perry, presumably, or Martin Lawrence, or Eddie Murphy, presumably, and they are donning, hair and makeup that is associated with women for the purposes of assuming a character in a movie. Okay, this is not a genuine expression of their own personal identity. and that makes it more distinct from I guess what trans people are doing, because they're not playing roles in a movie. So that's distinct. I acknowledge that. That's clearly different. And so in the case of, Eddie, Martin, and Tyler, they're performing, and they're performing in a quite literal sense because they're on a movie set, or maybe on a stage for a play. But even if they were to, like, I don't know, like, let's say they wanted to, like, do these things for Halloween, they would still be performing in some sense, even though it's not on a stage or not in a movie set. They would still be performing in the same way that anybody performs who dresses up in a Halloween costume. You're pretending to be the thing, if you dress up as Superman, you're pretending to be Superman. If you dress up as Black Panther, you're pretending to be Black Panther, etc. Right? So there's still a performance, even though it's not in the kind of canonical example of performing on stage or performing in a movie. So then, if you can apply it to the case of, like, Halloween or going to a Halloween party, right? There's some kind of performative element there, even though you're not being filmed, even though you're not in a movie, even though you're not in a play. Then wouldn't there also be a performative element if you're biologically male, you genuinely believe yourself to be a woman, and you want to fit the part, and so you or play. No, I don't. Maybe that's too loaded. You want your outward appearance and social context to match what you genuinely feel that you are, right? Is that still not a performance, or is it only a performance if and only if it turns out that what you think you are, you're not actually that thing? I think that it would hinge on that, which is actually what makes the question probably controversial from the point of view of pro-trans, people who buy into the trans ideology stuff. Is it would be considered, if it's not the case that all you need to be a woman is to feel you're a woman, and that there's some kind of, like, objective reality to it over and above your feelings that determines the correctness of that claim, right? Then you can't have a possibility where a person feels that they are a woman and not be one, right? You have to obliterate that that possibility would need to be obliterated by making the criteria contingent on what you feel in the first place, which is what I think a lot of people left of center believe, is that what makes you a woman is what you feel you are. And I guess the rest of society just has to take your word for it. Jake Uger had this whole unhinged thing about not believing people who claim to be trans or claim to be a woman if they're biologically male. I don't understand that, but it had this kind of outrage to it, like people have, who the Believe All Women crowd has. It was like, how dare you not believe a person who had a very serious criminal accusation against another person that they raped them. It's like, well, I mean, we could just take their word for it, but, like, some people lie. Even if you want to say a small percentage of people lie, that's fine, but some people lie. So, like, any particular instance, it ain't obvious whether or not they're lying, so just taking their word for it doesn't seem wise. But, like, why can't we just be nuanced like that? Why do we have to be hateful of women or some shit, or rape victims everywhere, if we don't just take a person's word for it? Like, motherfuckers make false accusations of crimes all the time. They may even genuinely believe that the person did it and still be wrong. Like, that possibility didn't cross your mind? Like, I don't know, man. So anyway, I don't want to get too far afield, but I'm spitballing here, and I'm kind of getting off topic, but I'm very fascinated by the implications of what he's saying. Anyway, let me shut up and let y'all listen to him more.
So if you're reducing, for example, say the civil rights movement to an afro, and you wear that, or you wear dreadlock wigs, that Rastafarians may wear, you do that because it's edgy, because it's cool, but ultimately because it's not you, and you're getting some kind of cultural capital from that by doing it.
And
well,
who's
don't
hurt
black
by
people
that?
who wear dress get some kind of
Well, it's
cultural
not a
capital
matter
from
of
it
who's
too?
hurt by.
Well, but even if you are a member of the in group, there's still some kind of cultural capital you can still gain from adorning a hairstyle. Like, so I got my dress. I love my aesthetic. And actually, it's funny. The origins of me growing out my hair was because I lived in a place where I couldn't, like, conveniently get somebody to cut my hair in a way that I liked. And I went to this hair salon, and this lady was like, I can cut black. And she was a black lady, and I trusted her because she was black. And she used to cut my hair, but then she didn't want to cut my hair. And so she convinced me to grow my hair out. So what happened was, I had to drive ridiculously far to go see her, and so I had to like save up my money and do all that stuff to get haircuts. So my hair would grow really long in the meantime. It was like I was like, man, I got to deal with that shit. So I finally got enough money, and I got the time to go see her on the weekend, and I had to schedule with her because she wasn't there every day like a regular barbershop. And I finally got linked up with her, and my hair had gotten long by the time I saw her, and she was like, "Oh, you have really nice hair. Why don't you let me twist your hair up?" And I was like, "Nah, I just want to cut." She's like, "Look, I'm gonna twist it up. You don't like it, you have to pay." I'm like, bet. Because I was like, I don't want to have to pay for this. Let me get a free hair. And honestly, I didn't think I would like it. So I was just like, all right, this is gonna be done for free, and then she's gonna cut it anyway. And then she did it or whatever, and it was all right. I was like, oh, okay, cool. I've never really thought about growing my hair out like that. And then so what she would do is she would just like touch my dreads up every once in a blue moon. It ended up being like once a month. But I was trying to do it like every 3 weeks, like get my hair touched up, whatever. But I didn't have no way to like take care of them. I didn't know, like I learned all that shit after the fact. When I started going to other people, they would teach me how to take care of my shit. Low key, my shit is still not perfect or whatever. But like that was the origin of it. It wasn't even like significant in the way that a lot of people, it's significant for a lot of people. And there's like a whole spiritual element to like growing out locks and stuff like that. That for me, it was just a matter of convenience in a particular kind of situation. And then I grew into liking it. And especially when they got real long, I was like, oh, I fuck with this hard. And then now it's kind of a part of who I am. And I really like my hair. And I'm starting to get into the kind of more spiritual significance of it. But I really, really value my hair now. It's like a part of me. And so there's some kind of social capital that I get from it, though, even though I'm a part of the in-group, or at least Black people wearing dreads. That's something that's salient in our culture. So to make it seem like the only people like who get something out of it like that are people who are not within the in-group who wear dreadlocks is weird to me. I think this is the stuff that culture is made of. So I don't know, man. Like even him wearing that as a college professor has some kind of social capital, and in some senses reaffirming of the hairstyle as a whole, because even like, people who get whatever kind of accolades and respect that a college professor gets as a Black man who still wear this, even in their old age, even when they're long and gray, it has some kind of significance for representation and the respectability of the hairstyle itself and the connotations and the stereotypes associated with it. So I don't know that he's being careful here, because his argument seems to be making it seem as though the only motivation that a person can have for wearing a hairstyle, if they're not a part of particular groups, is that they're going to gain something social from it. But like, I don't know, man. Like, why couldn't they have the same motivations I had, which is like, I just want to try this on and see if I like it, and then they decide, you know what, I actually like it, so I'm gonna keep wearing it. Like, I don't. Why is that impossible for Kim Kardashian? She's like, I'm gonna try to braid my hair. I've never done it before. I never saw myself wearing. That maybe that's for Black women, or that's for a different culture. I've never really tried that. But then she tries it, and it's like, maybe her Black friend, her Black homegirl, goaded her into it. Like, I'm gonna braid your hair for you, and that was maybe one of the ways that she could bond with some of her closest friends, because I'm pretty sure Kim fucks with Black people. She doesn't just literally fuck Black people. She fucks with Black people, if you know what I mean. I don't know. I think there's room for nuance there, and I think that the people who have this kind of staunch, cultural appropriation is the root of all evil stance are not willing, for whatever reason, to, maybe it's motivated reasoning, but for whatever reason, they're not willing to acknowledge that nuance. Anyway,
It's who's being disrespected by it.
Well, who's being disrespected by it?
A whole culture of people whose identities are wrapped.
Let me rewind that,
whatever
because
you're
that part is
dressing
huge.
into and can
A fashion or a style or whatever.
I would say that's a performance. So if somebody's culture and somebody's identity becomes a performance, then it's reductive. So if you're reducing, for example, say the civil rights movement to an afro, and you wear that, or you wear dreadlock wigs, that Rastafarians may wear, you do that because it's edgy, because it's cool, but ultimately because it's not you, and you're getting some kind of cultural capital from that by doing it.
And who's hurt by that?
Well, it's not a matter of who's hurt by it, it's who's being disrespected by it.
Well, who's being disrespected by it?
A whole culture of people whose identities are wrapped in whatever you're dressing into and can then take off.
Amala, you don't agree.
Okay, so let me try to steelman him a little bit. I think he has in mind people who are getting like fake dreads or like they're wearing wigs or something like that, weaves or something like that. That's not their natural hair, because they want the aesthetic, they want the benefit of looking a certain way, and the socially salient positive benefits of that. But they didn't like grow out their hair like I did. Like, this is all me. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, they didn't like, and this takes time. This is 8 years worth of growth here. You know what I'm saying? And a lot of struggle, a lot of detangling, a lot of retwisting, a lot of hours of my hand with my hands in my hair like this, twisting shit and palm rolling my shit and washing my shit and putting oil in my shit. Like, I did that for years to produce this. And you have a person who can take a shortcut and they just, get a wig that's made out of somebody else's hair, or is made out of material that's made to look and feel like hair, and they just throw it on for a day or two because they like the aesthetic and they like how ethnic it makes them look. They like the social capital. People find them attractive because of that or whatever, and then they can just take it off. Now I can cut my hair, and it wouldn't take that long to do so. So in some sense, I could change my aesthetic fairly quickly. But he seems to be gesturing towards this idea that there's something there's something disrespectful about people who just want to get the aesthetic and they're not really willing to delve into the deeper meaning that is possibly associated with particular cultural norms or hairstyles and things like that. So I don't know, man. Maybe that's the best I can do as far as steelmanning the position. I still have doubts about that though, because it just feels like I don't know. It feels like he's overstating the significance of these things. Like, there is a culture, particularly a Rastafarian culture, that puts a huge premium and a significant spiritual on locks. That is in some sense not being observed by a person who would don a Rasta wig or something like that. But they're not doing it because they have a blatant disregard or disrespect to those spiritual norms. They just don't buy into it. They just don't believe in them. So there's a spiritual significance to drinking wine in the context of the Catholic Church and communion. But there are people who just drink wine just to get drunk. And so are they inherently disrespecting those religious norms because they're not observing them, or do they just not buy into those theological presuppositions, the spirituality of it? They just don't buy into it. Are they, I don't know, man. Are they guilty of some kind of disrespect? Maybe. I don't know. I mean, I don't, but like, it doesn't make, like, why would you expect somebody who's not a believer to respect those tenets? And why would you expect somebody who's not really buying into Rastafarian culture or is not really like a member of that culture to respect that? All they want is the hairstyle. And there's all kinds of cultural precedents and cultural norms around donning hairstyles via wigs and things like that we've normed on a regular basis. And so it doesn't seem far-fetched, like, to say that that's somehow disrespectful inherently because it fails to observe it in the way that those who are a part of the culture observe it is weird. I don't know that we would say that generally in all contexts. So it seems to be a kind of inconsistency there. But maybe, I mean, I don't know. I'm trying to think of like an example where even I would like be like, yeah, that's disrespectful. And then again, like, I keep coming back to this. It's like, well, then would you apply that equally to trans people? Like, like, there are some women out there, cis women is the people left of center call them, who feel genuinely disrespected by biological males who present as women, because fundamentally what they object to is the idea that a person who's not biologically female can become female simply by changing their style of dress, and maybe a few mannerisms are more effeminate, and those things are associated with being a woman, and that's all that it takes. So much to the point where you have people who are biologically male who have won Woman of the Year over what the left will call cis women, and have competed with women in women's sports and have demolished them, reaping all of the benefits of the parts of their anatomy that are masculine and male, by the way. Even though people pretend as if that doesn't matter in these domains of competition. Like I really genuinely want to know whether or not he would consistently apply these principles, because they seem applicable. And it's actually on that basis why a lot of women object to it. So maybe that might be one where I would agree with, kind of, is like, yeah, women feel like they're being disrespected because you have biological males who are wearing womanhood as a costume for their own self-aggrandizement. It's not just for mere social reasons, but although that's part of it, because there's an interplay between the social and the psychological, but to reaffirm their sense of self and their sense of gender identity. That's one of the biggest reasons why they do it. So it's part to fit in or be accepted as such, for some of them at least, and it's part because they feel more comfortable presenting as that, because they genuinely feel that they are a woman. In the case of trans women, and you can apply this with trans men, presumably. The non-binary people, I guess, I'm not really clear on that, because they talk as if they're just neither. They're neither a man or a woman, and I think that might have to do with their ambivalence about the labels in the first place. That they don't really feel that they quite nicely fit in either. I mean, the closest I can get to that, and this is maybe a strained analogy, is that I don't feel like the label conservative or liberal, either one of those labels, which are on opposite ends of the political spectrum in our American context in particular, fit me. And so I'm somewhere in the middle. And so I often make this joke in virtue of me understanding that I'm politically non-binary. But perhaps if you needed a label, I would say I'm centrist or moderate. I'm somewhere in the middle. That's about as like as specific as I can get, because I am trying to figure some things out. So I can understand if you felt that with respect to your gender identity. Like, I'm not really a man, but I'm not really a woman either, because certain aspects of me are very masculine, certain aspects of me are very feminine. It really depends on the day or whatever. It depends on whatever circumstances it depends on. And so I'm just non-binary. That's like the best I can do. So maybe they feel something like that. That makes sense. But what you feel you are doesn't. That's what's interesting. Is like, fundamentally, I think what makes this controversial is like what you feel you are when it comes to gender. What you feel you are, to what extent is that a part of the criteria of correctness? Is it exclusively what it depends on? So I'm a man because I feel I'm a man. It has nothing to do with my biology. Really? Is that how it works? And it just happens to be the case that the overwhelming majority of people are cis. The overwhelming majority of people's sense of themselves matches up with their biology. I mean, maybe. I mean, that would be a phenomenal coincidence. But it would make more sense if, like, the biology actually was a part of the criteria of correctness in the first place, which has a huge undermining effect on trans issues. Sorry, this is not supposed to be about that, but like the intersection between trans politics and cultural appropriation are fascinating to me, and I can't stop talking about it.
Agree.
I don't. No.
You think worrying about appropriation is a waste of time?
Here's a
I
mile from
think
PragerU.
not only is it somewhat a waste of time, but it's nearly impossible. You just mentioned there are nearly hundreds of ways that one could appropriate somebody else's culture or their livelihood. And to expect any one human being to keep on top of that throughout their entire life, I think, is an unrealistic ask. And I think imitation is a form of flattery. I appreciate my food by eating it. I appreciate the hair that I wear by wearing it, by putting on the clothes that I wear. And every single item around us in this room could probably be attributed to a certain culture. Do we have to constantly worry about what culture we gain things from?
So Amala's from PragerU. I've seen a lot of her videos. Her story involves, she grew up really progressive and used to be kind of really, really woke, and then, I guess was what they call red pilled, and so now I guess she's on the conservative side or whatever. I never fully understood people just doing complete 180s. I never fully understood that because I went through a similar experience in terms of like my Christian upbringing, and then I've turned away from it a little bit, but I didn't go full blown woke. I didn't just like abandon everything I ever knew. Like that seems weird to me, and there may be something more going on in terms of what would motivate a person to do that that's just beyond me, and so I won't speculate any further. But that seems to be a part of her journey. But so now she's doing all of these things for PragerU, and I guess kind of like very pro-conservative, and at the very least she's very anti-woke, and so I vibe with her in terms of that. I'm not really willing to go all the way conservative though, because that's kind of like where I was coming away from. uh, but I was never willing to go all the way full-blown woke either, because I saw a lot of similar elements on both sides in terms of the proselytism and the dogmatism that is inherent in kind of Christian fundamentalist views. I saw that in wokeness like right away. It seemed like obvious, kind of in the same vein. Even though the wokest of the woke pretend like they're nothing like the religious zealots that they hate so much, they actually are in many ways just like them, and they don't even fucking realize it because they're so dismissive of it that they won't even bother to understand. And if they understood it, then they would actually see some more similarities. Probably they'd be freaked out by the similarities that they see. But yeah, so Amala made two good points that I want to comment on really quick, and then I got to get out of here because I got to be somewhere. I got to take a stupid class. But yeah, the first one is that it does seem to be kind of a fool's errand to be trying to like keep track of what aspects of culture belong to which group, and having all of these like inherent restrictions, like we got to cite our sources every time we eat a certain food or do a certain dance that doesn't come from our culture or some shit, or like wear a certain garb or whatever, wear a certain hairstyle. Like we got to cite our sources. Like it's like, oh, like my dreadlocks come from this culture originally, so like I've gotten some kind of tacit approval. Like, do we need like, I don't know, cultural visas that give us like temporary permission to like partake? And like it past a certain point, I get the spirit of what she's saying. It's like, yeah, that's ridiculous and petty, really fucking petty. And that's the element of it that's like probably the most petty. But even the sense of ownership, the sense in which certain groups, certain cultural elements belong to certain groups, isn't even robust enough to even justify doing that kind of thing. It ain't like they copy wrote it. It ain't like they, like they're trademarked and shit. Like the fuck you mean? Like, so, and that would be to get the law involved in it, which I'm not suggesting she's suggesting, or anybody who argues about this is suggesting. But what I'm saying is it lacks the robustness general, and an example or a manifestation of the robust sense of ownership would be the law, but it lacks that. And so like, it just seems like a fool's errand to do it. And then the other point that she made that I agree with is, yeah, there does seem to be something celebratory about partaking in other people's culture. Like part of the reason why you do it, or at least a common motivation for doing it, is because you like it. And one of the ways that you demonstrate that you like it is you join in, you partake, you copy, you emulate. Imitation is a form of flattery, is I think the term she used. That's an interesting point. It's one way to show respect. And so the discourse it insists that what you're doing is inherently disrespectful when you imitate someone, but that's not always true, actually, because we tend to imitate people we fuck with. We tend to imitate people that we love, that we admire, and that we respect. It's one of the reasons why I imitate in many ways my father, because I love that man and I respect him, and I feel like he's the kind of person that's worthy of imitating, because things are working out in his life to a certain degree. Same with my mother, same with other people that I know and love. And so we kind of borrow things from other people. And why couldn't we do that with respect to culture? And so I get her point. To try to mesh her point with the professor's point, though, there is this dynamic of profiteering or profiting that I think Amala's not really contending with. And I think that that's probably the source of validity on his side, which is that sometimes people are not doing this because they're flattered. Sometimes people are taking things because they can profit in a way that the people that they're taking things from can't, right? And that's where the discourse on whiteness comes in, because there's a long history of white people doing this kind of thing. They've taken cultural elements from various different cultures that they've colonized, and then they've monetized them in ways that those cultures never could, partly because they've been taken over or colonized by white people, but also because they didn't have whatever the institutional or economic things in place were in the first place to even monetize them in a certain sense, in terms of the capitalistic sense. Maybe they didn't have a full-blown economic system of capitalism up and running in those areas where these things are native to. Maybe they didn't employ them in the same way. Maybe so for example, like, there have been certain things that have been weaponized by Europeans that they got from other places, and those original cultures didn't weaponize them, and then they use those weapons as instruments to colonize, for example. So I don't want to make it sound like it's all smiles and rainbows. I mean, I think that there are some more predatory examples of this kind of thing that we would do well to remain vigilant against and criticize. But I don't think every time a person adopts the cultural customs of another group that they're doing something inherently oppressive or white supremacist even. I think that goes too far. So I'm about to get out of here. We're going to listen to a little bit more, and then we're going to get done.
Does intention have anything to do with
Well, I
it?
guess I didn't hear
What a
anything
great
about anybody
question.
worrying about it. What I hear about when I think about and talk about cultural appropriation is people becoming more aware of it. We could say the same thing about racism, sexism, homophobia. Just because you can't solve it and don't see it at every corner doesn't mean we shouldn't be aware of it and trying to address
Wow,
it.
do you
So,
really put those on the same level?
I absolutely do.
Racism and sexism, you put it on the
Absolutely.
same level as
Absolutely.
cultural appropriation?
That's exactly.
So if somebody wears their hair like you're
This is
wearing
the thing that
it,
Fox News was talking
you
about.
put that on the same level as racism.
White supremacy.
Absolutely. I put that on the same
Wow.
level as white supremacy, because white supremacy is intersectional.
White supremacy is intersectional.
Read Audre Lorde. It's white, and here's what I'm saying. That's why I started by saying this is about humanity or the lack of humanity. When we're putting on someone else's culture, that is somebody else's identity.
The model's like,
So
nope,
when you're
nope,
talking
nope,
about
nope,
being
no. She's
worried about stuff, I'm
shaking
talking
her.
about this in the context of power and history.
The model's
You're
like,
Brittany,
no,
right?
I don't believe you. No.
Do you think black people appropriate?
I think it's possible for Black people to appropriate a different culture, just because Black culture is the only culture that exists, and every culture has their own boundaries or things that they find offensive and things they want other cultures to respect.
How many of you?
All right, I got to get out of here. Man, I wish I could spend more time on it. I might continue from where we left off right now. But it's interesting. She said, "Do you think Black people can appropriate?" And I don't know that she answered that question directly. I feel like she dodged that question, in my opinion. I'll come back to it later because I got to go for time. But man, this is such a deep thing, man, and I can't. The segment's already over, but I want to do a deep dive on this shit, bro. I want to continue, so I'm gonna do another segment on this shit, and I'm gonna do hella segments today. But yeah, man, this is a fascinating topic. I got a lot to say about it that I haven't even broached. Aspects of it that I haven't even broached yet, but I got to get out of here. I'm already late 5 minutes for this class I got to take. Man, keeping this podcast going. But yeah, Black News Podcast. I'm doing current event segments. I'll probably be doing them throughout the week in a piecemeal way, just to kind of get my content out there. Please remember to like and subscribe and share. My link tree is there. I got all the social medias and everywhere that you can find my podcast. Black News Podcast, Black spelled the normal way, Muse spelled with a Z. Until next time, peace.